Hello, I'm Mike Yeager. I'm a pastor of a church in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And every Monday night we get together to pray and we cry out to God for revival, an awakening, an outpouring of His Spirit. And of course, when this virus began to be manifested, we began to pray about it. Well, tonight, as we were in prayer, I began to find myself prophesying as I was praying. Now, many times in the last 45 years, when I would begin to prophesy, I had no idea what was going to come out of my mouth. And so tonight was the same. And out of my mouth, I heard the Lord say these words. He said that the estimates that were given for the amount of people that would die because of this pandemic was not a mistake. And actually, I was very shocked when I heard that come out of my mouth. And the Lord said to me, He said that the estimates that the medical professionals had given about how many would die, not just in America, but in the world, were accurate. He said, but I heard the cry of my people. They were crying out, and not just the cry of God's people, but even sinners in America and around the world, that I heard their cry for mercy. And He said, I have had mercy on America and the world. And so the projected number of people who would die, even daily now, is being drastically lowered, lower and lower and lower. And the medical professionals themselves are in total shock and amazement. So I just did a little bit of study, and I discovered when this thing began to first happen back in about January, they were estimating about 3.4% of all of those who got this virus would die. And so they were estimating right around 2,200,000 deaths in America alone. Listen to this, 2,200,000 deaths, with up to 50,000 people a day at the peak, when it would reach its peak. Well, then all of a sudden, the numbers began to drop. And then they dropped it down to 1.7 million people could die. And then they dropped it down to 510,000 people could possibly die. And then they dropped it down to 240,000 people could possibly die. And then, of course, at the first day of this month of April, they said, well, 100 to 200,000 people could die. But today they came out with a brand new figure, and now they're saying 83,000 people could die. And I perceived in my heart that literally that even less, half less than that. For in other words, they're saying 83,000. In my heart, I perceived the Lord was saying even less than 40,000 people would die in America because of this virus. And why is the numbers, and it could even go down to 20,000, really, honestly. Why? Because people are crying out for mercy. And as we cry out for mercy, and we know the mercy of the Lord endureth forever, as we cry out for mercy, whether you're a sinner or you're a saint, God responds, because God's mercy endureth forever. So at the end of this little talk that I'm giving right now, I've got a video from Fox that just came out that verifies that the death rate is dropping drastically. And I heard the Lord say that the medical world doesn't get the credit for this. It's not the medical world stopping it. I'm not saying they're not involved at all, but it's God. God Himself stepped in and had mercy on our nation and on humanity once again. And so we need to make sure that we give Him all the credit, all the praise, and all the glory.
What's your opinion of it?
Here's what I would say. I'm not an epidemiologist, okay? I'm not a scientist. And to some extent,
Right.
I come at this from the same perspective that I came at when I wrote Tell Your Children, which, as you mentioned, we've talked about a couple of times, which is I'm a journalist. And what I think I'm pretty good at is seeing whether what people say lines up with what's really happening. And unfortunately, what we are seeing and what we have seen for the last couple of weeks is that the models that have predicted really apocalyptic things in places like New York City and nationally and in the UK don't seem to be matching what's going on in reality. And in some cases, these epidemiologic models are extremely new. They've gone extremely south in a matter of days. And so I think we really have to ask what's going on here and whether or not there are strategies that might be less damaging to the economy that would do just as well, because we've taken huge steps. We've put 10 million people out of work, more actually, because that's the official numbers. In just a couple of weeks, we've caused real societal harm and disruption, and we've done it on the basis of models that don't seem to line up with reality in real time.
So let me ask you now, and this is a conversation we're going to continue on this show, and we're going to do something on it tomorrow, taking a look at what the predictions were and what the outcome has been, because it's important to keep track. But just give us a couple of examples of what you're talking about when you say the models haven't produced accurate results.
Sure. So the most recent one is the University of Washington model, which was created and released only a week ago, and as of today, predicted that as of today there would be about 50,000 people in New York State hospitalized with coronavirus, and there are about 12 or 13,000. So this is a model that the numbers in a week have been off by a factor of 4. And that's also true for ICU beds. I think the delta there is about 3 to 1. Meanwhile, there's a state model actually in Oregon that's gotten very, very little attention that was just revised on Monday to show that if Oregon did nothing, if it ended the lockdown, this is the state's own prediction, is that there would be 90 people in ICU beds at the beginning of May. This is a state with more than 4 million people. If the lockdown continued, there would be 30 people. So that's about 2 people a day different being in ICU versus not. And the question is, are we going to lock the state of Oregon down, cause real societal disruption? Yeah. In some cases, not in some cases, close schools, force kids, to be home with parents who in some cases may be very stressed, may be abusive. They're going to be out of sight of teachers. I'm very, very worried about the domestic violence and the child abuse implications of what we're doing.
I agree. I agree. And the alcoholism and the suicide note, you're right.
Exactly. And economic harm is real harm. So to me, the question is not, should we do something about this? Of course we need to do something about this. The question is, do these massive lockdowns make sense when we can't even necessarily figure out how they're working?